Manuel Quezon, the man on the 20-peso bill. Printed in the 20-peso Philippine bill is a face of a young man with a subtle, almost unnoticeable smirk. For foreigners who are not so familiar with Philippine money bills, nor so interested to inspect the faces printed on them, they just often overlook the image. This is also the case for the locals, albeit the name of the man rings a bell, taking the memory from second-grade history class or the name of a city and a province. Under the face of the man on the left side is a written text depicting one of his valuable contributions to the country, Filipino as the national language, 1935. Parallel to it on the right side is his name, Manuel Quezon. Looking at it brings no noteworthy impact, yet Manuel Quezon is no plain fellow. He was a revolutionary, a lawyer, a legislator, and the first president of the Philippine Commonwealth. Albeit the money bill only displays his contribution to his own country, his role in the international arena during this time is also notable. His subtle smirk might tell more of a story than what meets the eye.
The enactment of the McDuffie Tidings Bill marks a new era in the relation of great nations with weaker ones. The United States has granted the Philippines their independence, thus completely surrendering its sovereignty over the people of the Philippine Islands. Never before in the history of the world, a great nation has given up her sovereignty over a weaker people.
Manuel Quezon was born in the remote town of Baler, Tayabas in 1878, back when the Philippines was still a Spanish colony. His parents were school teachers who owned a small piece of agricultural land with a measly income. However, he did receive a formal education from the country's capital, Manila. After all, his parents were mestizos, a mix of Spanish and Filipino blood, and in comparison to the condition of other Filipinos, then called Indios, Quezon's family was considered well off. Yet Quezon did not come from humble beginnings as a room and mess boy for a priest while studying in Manila in exchange for free boarding and lodging in the convent. Quezon was not always a revolutionary. Initially, it did not occur to him to join the Filipino struggle against Spain. All he wanted was to pursue a career in law. However, even as a young boy, he exposed the hypocrisy and abuse of Spanish friars and officers. When he was 18, his father took him to meet the local priest of Baler. Back then, priests held important political power in local villages. It was expected of everyone to show respect, otherwise one would be punished. This priest was too fat for a man that Quezon shook his hand rather than kiss it, which was a customary act of respect. The priest was outraged by such insolence. Later on, Quezon found out that the priest had an affair with a woman which he himself got acquainted with upon discovering the priest's secret. He got hold of the priest's handkerchief, inserted it in his pocket, and tootled along the main street cockily. In another encounter, he got into a quarrel with a Spanish officer from his hometown, wherein he knocked an officer down over a woman. To strike an officer was a grave offense, and it led Quezon to be imprisoned. Yet rather than revealing the true reason behind the quarrel, the officer framed him as a revolutionary. This false accusation began to pique his interest in the Filipino struggle for independence, albeit at that time it was still shallow. Somehow, these seemingly funny events of Quezon's young life foreshadowed his eventual resistance from the colonizers and his passion for justice. In 1894, he began to study law, although it was cut short due to the Philippine Revolution. When the Americans took hold of the Philippines after the Mock Battle of Manila in 1898, a secretly planned war between Spain and the USA as a way of conceding the Philippines to the latter, Quezon took part in the Philippine struggle against the Americans. Thereafter, he was briefly imprisoned for 6 months by American forces. After his release, he passed the bar exams and eventually worked as a fiscal in 1903. In his years as a fiscal, he handled civil and criminal cases wherein he charged large amounts to the rich and none to the poor. This only shows his compassion for the less privileged Filipinos. He also won a case against the owner of a powerful American newspaper and an American lawyer charged with estafa, which is a crime of fraud, seeking financial gain who tried to step on ignorant Filipinos. Quezon soon entered the world of politics and joined the Nacionalista Party, which dominated the 1907 elections. He was appointed as the Philippine Resident Commissioner to the United States, wherein he was able to take part in the U.S. congressional deliberations as a voice for the Filipinos. His distinctive technique of praising the Americans rather than attacking them swayed Congress to pass the 1916 Jones Law, which expressed the intention of the U.S. to grant complete independence to the Philippines. This led to the Filipinization of the bureaucracy, wherein the legislator and executive had become dominated by Filipinos. Eventually, Quezon became the president of the Senate. Then, after the passage of the Tayabas-McDuffie Act in 1934, the act which granted full Philippine independence after a 10-year transition period, which he claimed to be his initiative, he was elected the president of the Philippine Commonwealth.
Under the blue skies of Manila in the Philippines, Manuel Louis Quezon is inaugurated as the first president of the newly formed Philippine Commonwealth. Watching the ceremony is Vice President Garner and 17 other members of the United States Senate. For 37 years, America has ruled the 7,000-odd islands which make up the Philippine archipelago. Now, following the precedent set by Great Britain with her colonies, the Filipinos are to be given the opportunity of governing themselves for an experimental period of 10 years, and President Quezon becomes their first ruler.
Quezon had several notable contributions during his presidency, both locally and internationally. This may have been unknown to the world and even the Filipinos themselves, but Quezon had an important role during the Second World War. Thousands of Jews fled Nazi persecution and sought asylum in various countries. Despite the country still being in a transition period towards independence, which hinders Quezon from fully imposing his will, he approved of admitting the Jewish refugees into the country and fought to admit as many as his power could allow him to. Around 30,000 of them found solace in Mindanao and other scantily populated areas. These refugees were given jobs and were eventually naturalized as Filipinos. This, along with Quezon's quest to strengthen the country's military defenses and attend to the plight of the landless peasantry, were his presidential legacies. However, by the end of the day, Quezon was still a politician. This meant that he was susceptible to a power play. For one, he stole the recognition from the Osrock's independence mission on the success of passing the Tayabas-McDuffie Act in 1934. Yet still, this is not to deny the fact of the important legacies he left to the Filipino identity. He spent his life fighting for Philippine independence, fighting off corruption, and also establishing the spirit of humanitarianism to refugees, which stretches even until today in the Russian-Ukrainian war. He is not merely a man printed on the 20-peso bill. He is the man who, despite his imperfections, should be given due recognition, for Quezon helped cement the Filipino identity. Thank you for listening. In case you didn't know, hitting the like button helps the channel quite a bit. Don't forget to subscribe so that you can join me again next time as we look into the life of other historical figures that shaped the world as we know it.